this is a situation where it's a little unusual in the sense that the denial letter I received was for short-term, long-term, and his waiver of premium on his life insurance policies all in one go.
So just so people know, you're handling three
separate denials, three policies, different standards, and all of them in denials. Okay. So usually, we'll see their denial of short-term, or they'll get short-term and they'll be denied the long-term. But from the get-go, principal was denying all of them.
Hi, I'm attorney Greg Dell, here with attorneys Alex Palomara and Stephen Jessup, and we have the opportunity to talk to you today about a recently resolved case against Principal Financial on a long-term disability insurance victory that we had. And Stephen, you're going to tell us a little bit about why this client was denied, what you were able to do, and how we're going to continue to maintain the claim for the client. And along the way, we're going to give tips for people who may have a principal claim so that they could avoid getting themselves in this situation, or some information for them to help them get their benefits reinstated if they ever find themselves denied. So start off with giving us the background.
Yeah, so this is a situation where it's a little unusual in the sense that the denial letter I received was for short-term, long-term, and his waiver of premium on his life insurance policies all in one go.
So just so people know, you're handling three
separate denials, three policies, different standards, and all of them in denials. Okay. So usually, we'll see their denial of short-term, or they'll get short-term and they'll be denied the long-term. But from the get-go, principal was denying all of them. He was a director of operations for a corporation where they help disadvantaged youth, homeless youth, or like women who are involved in domestic violence, kind of like halfway house type stuff. He suffered a heart attack. And then from that went out on disability. Now the strange thing is normally after a heart attack, insurance companies are usually a little more sensitive about the idea of disability. He did try to come back to work and do it for a bit, but he just wasn't able to keep up with the pace of it. Filed his claim, and then based on just one peer review done by an internal doctor, I believe internal medicine, determined that he'd be capable of doing sedentary work. So just really stripping it down like they usually do to the lowest common denominator of the work capability. The interesting thing that we raised in the appeal itself was the review initially done. The doctor said he's going to have permanent restrictions the rest of his life because of the severity of the heart attack he had and just the heart issues in general. However, he didn't seem to be limited to anything while at rest, so he should be capable of doing a sedentary job because it's low physical demand. And that was the basis of the denial. I was despite his doctors being supportive with the attending physician statements and everything that were sent. So it was a bad denial in my opinion. And when parsing through the claim file once we got it, it's what we typically see. Looking at the occupational duties strictly in a generic idea of physical capability, not the actual duties of the job or the mental demands of the job, and then kind of ignoring and playing the game, well, your doctor says this, but our doctor thinks this, and we just don't see enough information to support restrictions and limitations from your sedentary job, and that was the basis of the denial.
I want to back you up on something on the fact pattern. You said he had the heart attack, and then he went back to work, and then later filed a claim.
Very shortly, soon thereafter. So he had the issue, he had the heart attack, right? Went back to work for a period of time after recovery. He didn't file for disability right after, whether he uses PTO or sick time, whatever the case may be. But he was only back for a short period of time, maybe a couple months, and he just wasn't able to keep up with the pace energy-wise. And he noticed, and this is very common with severe cardiac issues, his focus just wasn't what it used to be. He couldn't sustain the way that he used to.
So that gives, for someone, that shows me they have a lot of credibility. Yeah. When they have a heart attack or a stroke or whatever it may be, or a significant medical event, and they go back to work shortly thereafter, and they stay at work for a month or so, or even longer, and then they realize they can't hack it, but it gives them a lot of credibility. They actually tried to return to work and stay at the job. Yeah. And when an insurance company doesn't even pay them short-term disability when they try to return to work, is kind of ridiculous in my eyes.
And one of the things with him as well, just the line of work that he's in, very much about trying to help people, didn't want to leave that. He was the director of the operations for the place. So, he had that feeling that if I'm not there, the good work that we're doing is going to suffer. So it was really a selfless desire of his.
In their vocational analysis, did they take into account was it just all physical requirements that they brought up in the denial, or did they take into account the the mental requirements of his occupation.
No, they didn't pay any lip service to even that. It was just to the physical, and even he did have secondary PTSD and some other mental health conditions they didn't bother looking at, which he was treating for as well.
And what were his job responsibilities?
So he was the whole director of this facility, managing housing for people, financial aspects, just the running of the day-to-day of these facilities that are meant to help people, women and children mainly, who are in some really rough goes.
And I'm assuming those were time-critical decisions as well.
Oh yeah.
So, one of the things that a company like Principal and many of the disability insurance companies don't take into consideration, like someone like this particular client's going to have good days and bad days potentially. So like he's not in for 2 or 3 days, or he needs to go lay down or take breaks and says, I can only do it for 2 hours at a time, and then I got to go lay down for an hour because I'm absolutely exhausted. It doesn't work like that in the real world. So when Principal and their hired gun doctors look at a situation and go, well, at what moment in time are you saying that this person's able to function? Is this with reasonable continuity for an 8-hour straight day when they need to be there? Because what's happening when these potential people who need placement are calling, between 10 and 12 and he's not there, or in the afternoon and then he's gone, and then a lot of these people are so reliant on him. And this is in any job, whatever it is, that time is so important. That's why we have work hours. That's why we have break limitations. That's why we have requirements of when we have to be there, when we don't. That's why we get permission to go on vacation, and we have sick days, because everybody relies. And he's just one piece of the operation, because when he's not there, then you need the guidance from 4, 5, or 10 other employees who are like, I don't know what to do. I have to ask Jim or whatever your client's name was to say, what are we supposed to do? And then everything pauses and everything gets backed up. So when an employee can't be reliable, and then on top of that, you mentioned that there was cognitive difficulties with this particular client. So how did you go about dealing with the cognitive issues that he was having when he got back to work?
Well, the cognitives are a little more sensitive. Like, you can send to a formalized neuropsychological battery, except it could be a little, it's not maybe the best test for it because there wasn't a neurological basis for it, right? So we did do an abbreviated form of cognitive testing with him. It took certain portions of the testing that would be most applicable to his diagnoses, and that did show, like, a lot of it, especially with just his functioning and processing speed, were definitely off, and memory issues, right? So we established that with regards, to those arguments the best we could. And then one of our biggest was, realistically, was the physical side of it, right? Was if we want to play, and I always say, if we're going to do this idea, they want to play lowest common denominator, can you do sedentary work? Let's establish the lowest common denominator, that you can't do that, because through the years we've learned that insurance companies, before they even really, doctors, their reviewers, get into what the job duties are, they first have to determine if there's a restriction and a limitation, right? So if they think he can do sedentary, well, his job is sedentary, so they don't go beyond that to understand more the nature of his sedentary job. So we sent him also for the physical testing, which we had to get clearance from his doctor, just because of the concerns of the stress it would put him under. He did miserably. He did miserably in the ability to do what would be, consistent sedentary work, just because he was so deconditioned, from it. So we hit the physical, and we also hit the cognitive aspect of it, and then tied back into what really the occupational duties are, right? So, kind of reverse engineering the way the insurance company may look at it, establish restrictions and limitations. Now, even after we submitted the appeal, they wanted to send him to an independent medical examination. The only problem is the first IME they wanted to send him to, he lives in Washington, was across state lines, and it was at least a 2.5-hour drive. And I'm like, can't find anything closer. Went back and forth, worked on it. Then they wanted to do their own neuropsychological exam, all this stuff. And then eventually, at some point, they just decided, we're not going to do that. We're going to go ahead with just peer reviews. So, all right. But our doctor who did the cognitive testing, they requested the data. Their doctor requested the data. That data was sent over. And honestly, just yesterday is when we got the call. I spoke with the claims examiner. They were approving the claim. For the short-term short-term and the long-term disability. Now his waiver of premium case has a different standard. That's like more like Social Security, warm body in a chair. And they're still arguing that he has some residual ability to do something. So that's still in the midst. But the big thing and most important thing to him is that there's the income coming in from the disability side of it. You know, and with Principal, you know, my experience, it's not one of the insurance companies that you get a lot of calls on, you know, compared to Hartford, Prudential, Unum, whatever the case may be. But as of late, have seen an uptick in Principal cases and denials. And in 2 of the 3 I've handled recently, those denials came in the short-term disability stage, which historically, that's the least likely, but it's where they, in my opinion, set the stage to deny the long-term disability. So, you know, it was a situation where there were some weird nuances, even with the appeal review process of it, but it did ultimately work out to the clients. You know, the client, when they wanted to do the IME, will he undergo one? Yes, of course, he has to under the policy. What needs to be done will be done. And, you know, eventually they just backed off on that and then took a look at it. And I would love to see what the reviewing doctor, we don't unfortunately get the right to see that, you know, saw, because obviously that reviewing doctor saw what we were saying, as opposed to what Principal's prior doctors and reviews were saying.
Well, it sounds like it took a lot of work to, you know, to get this claimant approved, and fortunately he is on claim now. But it was also interesting to hear that Principal's becoming more aggressive on their claim evaluations and potentially denying more claims than they used to. And we've seen that trend happen in the past based upon a management change internally. Now, we don't know.
And it's interesting.
I don't know, unless you know something.
But I don't, but it's also interesting that you bring it up that with some of the other companies like Guardian, Principal is also one of those insurance companies that writes a large number of individual private products, and then they have a group disability side. So Guardian was the same way, where it used to be, you know, a strong, you know, mainly individual stuff, and now we're seeing a huge uptick in their denials on their ERISA. And now it seems like, my opinion, and it could just be, it just happened I got the cases in a row, but that's what kind of seeing what's happening with Principal.
Well, congratulations to your client on this victory. If you're someone out there with a Principal long-term disability or short-term disability insurance claim, feel free to reach out to Stephen, Alex, any of our disability lawyers. No matter where you live in the country, we're always available to assist you, and we'll always provide you with an initial free phone consultation.